Hey, Rio here. It is week 2, Learn Together. So I'm recording this the first week of the semester. We've been together for a couple of days. I actually, that last night, spent some time reading through your Learn Together for week 1. And it was so enjoyable because you all had such great ideas. And some of you own some of your own, procrastination, which procrastination is really not helpful. There's a video I watched last night, and it was called Discipline is Freedom. And I really resonate with that because if I'm disciplined in my life and do what I know I want and need to do, it creates freedom for me. So if you are one of those folks who it's like, I just can't seem to work ahead, I'm working either at the due date or right after, right? Try to reframe that idea, right? Because discipline is freedom. Okay, so for this week, before I jump into what you're going to do for this week, I just want to say one little thing about VS Code. Most of you seem to navigate this and get this done, but by the way, if you are manually saving your files, go up to File and hit Autosave. In Andrew's course, I love Andrew. He's awesome. I'm not sure why he hasn't done this. Every time he sits, hit save, and then he goes and he runs the file. Okay, so do yourself a favor, right? And actually use autosave. Just makes your life easier. That way it automatically saves. Okay, so this week, what we're going to do this week is we're going to actually give you the experience. And I know that you all come into this class with different experiences already. But there's going to be two parts of this. Like you will kind of see on an ongoing basis, I will often have two pieces that you'll do. But in this sense, they are a little bit related. So I want you to do this, and you can read the write-up because basically I'm going to go over this, right? But I want you to take, and let me just flip over real quick and look at the section that you just finished. So in this case, right, we got the basics of variables and flow control. I mean, these are just really fundamental concepts, and you really start to see, especially if you're from a programming language that is what we call strongly types, to where when you declare variables and numbers, you actually have to tell the system, the compiler, that these are indeed the types you're using. But JavaScript doesn't require that. As a matter of fact, there is a movement in the JavaScript community for something called TypeScript. And TypeScript, I'm going to tell you, is gaining a huge amount of popularity because it's basically JavaScript with the ability to, or with the added functionality of making you not only define types, but other things that we see in stronger languages some might consider. But FYI. So anyway, you learn about variables. You actually get to build a little template, temperature converter. And again, I'm going to say this, when he sets these challenges, really attempt to do it, because the challenges are going to tell you how well you're doing, how well you're not only consuming, but integrating this knowledge. And of course, all these concepts are just fundamental. As a matter of fact, this whole course is just fundamental. So this first block where we're looking at booleans and comparisons and if statements and advanced if statements, ors, ands, ors, and then variable scope, which I thought was great to end with. So first, let me just say this before we get into talking about the work. When you look at JavaScript code online and you see the way they declare and assign variables, you will see the var used, the var keyword. And notice Andrew does not use var, and that's because the newer versions of JavaScript were really moving away from var because of the way that var is scoped. It's just a little confusing to understand. So I'm going to tell you this right now. I don't want to see anybody using var. Okay. When I see the use of var, I think two things. A, you're not really paying attention, maybe, or you've come in with some other knowledge, or you've actually found some code online that is what you're trying to do, and you're just using it without thinking about it. So don't use var. Okay, use let, and actually we'll hear about const later, but these are some of the newer, because for a while JavaScript is very popular now, but for a while it was not so popular and really got a bad reputation, and partly because of some of the things we've seen being improved in the later versions. All right, so now let's talk about it. So the two aspects is, first I want you to take what you've learned in that section 3, the JS code that you've learned, and I want you to create something, right? Using all of the things that you've learned: variable declaration, if blocks, else blocks, comparisons, booleans, right? Understanding scope, right? So I want you to, in this case, come up, and this actually, I spend a little time, and I'm going to show you my code. I spent a little time thinking about this because I was looking about, and here's where this class is going to help you, this part of the class, right? So what you're learning with Andrew is you're learning the actual, how the code works, how do you make it work, how do you use it, how do you understand it. And this part of the course is really going to be, how do we actually create something with what we now know? Because, and this is the key, right? Developers develop things. So how do you develop something? And then the thing is, first you have to come up with an idea of what you want to develop. And for this class, I think you could probably safely just look at your own needs. Like for me, one of the things I'm really focused on right now is two things: diet and exercise. This is my kind of focus of my life. So that would be something I wanted to, write some code that only uses that section 3. But let me say this: there are going to be some of you that are going to have more advanced JS knowledge, and you're going to want to use it. Here's my thing: you can use it, but only if you explain it. Okay, so if in the comments you use something outside of the scope of section 3, it is just your responsibility to give a short description and maybe a link to some documentation. Like the most important documentation for JavaScript on the web is MDN. Let me just, for right now, just go ahead, right? JavaScript, Microsoft, Mozilla Developer Network, right? From the people that created Firefox. So this is like the definitive reference right now for JS, okay? And actually, you can see there's a lot of other things in here, but JS, matter of fact, you can just search for, you can find tutorials, technologies, here's JavaScript. And obviously, you can see just by looking in here. So here's back to here. Matter of fact, back to here. So now I kind of veered off a little bit. So what I want you to do, and I'll show you what I did, is actually think about something in your life that is based on some kind of logic, some kind of calculation possibly, and then write some code that reflects that. So you've wrote little bits of, like when you wrote just the converter. So for this assignment, and you can see it by looking at my work would be, would it be minimal? Would at least be meeting the requirements. And then if you have more experience, write a more involved if then else block, right? All right, so that's step 1. Let's actually, before I go to step 2, go ahead and look at my code. So what I did here is I set up first, right, this code is similar to a program that I use every day for tracking my food and workouts, right? Because I really actually wrote this code a couple times through just to really think about it. And actually, one of the things I realized is that, and I'm not sure why I did this, and I like this, is generally just using single quotes is best. So I've declared name, I've declared a message that's setting in the global scope that's going to be used in my if blocks. Not sure why that got over. But, oh, by the way, the other thing I would say to you, I'm going to do Control A, and then I'm going to show you something that's really beneficial. And I want you to use this, which is format your selection, right? So if you're writing code and it's all over the place, let the editor format it for you so it just looks cleaner. So what I did is I set up a calorie budget, and that's what these are, cal budget for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I set up a is active for the day, and then I set up a calorie multiplier. This is actually something I think a lot about because I'm pretty active, and every day, the more active I am, because I want to be in a deficit in order to lose weight. I'm actually targeting a certain goal weight. But in this case, I'm just trying to express one part of this idea, right, in code that I've learned. So so I set those up as variables, and these are all global scoped, right? And you might think about, why did I put these in the global scope? Could I have put them somewhere else? Would I have? This is something we learn over time. And in this case, this is simulating the idea that these are user settings that the user has set up somewhere. And so what you have to do is, when you're doing something like this, you want to kind of think like you can't create the whole app to begin with. You're creating one aspect of the app. So for me, I'm only creating the idea that if I'm active and it's particular lunchtime, breakfast time, dinner time, and if I'm active, then I can take my budget and I can increase it by this multiplier. Okay. So because I'm tracking 3 meal times, there's only going to be one at a time that I can be looking at. What I did first is I set a if block, and I said, if not breakfast, if not lunch, if not dinner, which basically means you didn't set one of these correctly. Okay. And so only in that case, then in this case, if I didn't set them up, I'd get an error message. So this is coding for error checking. But as soon as I did this, I realized, well, I also didn't check for if you'd accidentally set 2 of them. You couldn't be lunch and breakfast. But I thought, okay, I'm going to stop. It's getting a little too involved for the assignment that we're looking at. But that is definitely something I should handle. But in this case, in my else block, I ended up, and I rewrote this and played with it a couple times because I was writing if else's and I had forgotten. And this is a really important thing to understand, is that, and when you're doing an if else, as soon as it hits an else, it drops out of the program flow. And this is part of what you're learning is flow control here, right? So then I wrote some if breakfast. And I actually almost put this code up as a challenge to see who could figure this out, because it took me a few minutes to figure it out, because I had is breakfast time and is active, and my code wasn't working. And I was like, wait a minute, this is simple code, it should work. So anyway, I rewrote it this way, and I'll show you in a minute how I figured out, because it was like it wasn't jumping out at me, even with the amount of coding I do. Sometimes it's just the more coding you do, it's like anything else, the better you get at it. But there are ways to help you see when you have logic errors, and I'll show you what I used. It's never too soon to introduce the debugger. So then in this case, I said, if it's breakfast time and if you're active, then I gave a message. Now, actually, here's where I just assigned, because I had set that up as a variable. I had declared it but hadn't assigned it. And so then here in the block, I assigned it. And so if it's active, then here is the message. And then what I'm doing here is I'm taking my budget and multiplying it by my multiplier because of the active state of the user. Else, I'm just saying your calorie budget is this. Do the same for lunch and dinner. And then in this case, I only output the actual console, the message to the user, only in the block that it is correctly. I've checked for the errors. I've run all the if blocks. And then in that case, I've run the console log. So that means it will not run the name. And matter of fact, let me just show you. I actually committed my code. So let me just show you. There we go. So now it's lunchtime and has been increased. And there's my budget. Okay. But in this case, and this is the other thing for this example, right? So let's say they were all false. So in this example, what you have to do is you have to make sure all the branches of your code are actually working correctly. And you see Andrew do this. The only way to do this is actually to run the code itself, right? So in this case, right, I should get the error message, and I do. All right, so here's what I'm going to recommend. If you're running into your code's not working the way you think it is, go over to the little bug, and then I'm going to run debugger in Node.js. And then I have set a breakpoint right here. And now what I can do is just step through my code. And what that does is it shows you how the code is actually running line by line based on the variables I've set above in this case, and it will help you find your errors, okay? And then when you're done, you can just hit stop, right? Let me go back just for a second. Well, actually, he's going to talk about debugging, I think. I'll check this out pretty soon. But if you want to know more about debugging, I'm telling you, the sooner you learn debugging, the better, okay? All right, so let me come back here. Actually, come back here. There we go. So the first part of this is to create that, right? Now, I'm not telling you it has to be a certain amount of lines. What I want you to do is use all that you've learned in this section. And again, if you use code outside of it, just make sure you give some documentation. So the next thing I want you to do is actually give some time to think about this. So part of this course, a really important part from a grading perspective, is actually the 3 times you actually have to create something and come in and do a code review with me, okay? So I actually have those in the schedule. I believe I've talked about that, but you can actually go into syllabus and scroll down and see those dates when they are. As we move closer to them, I'll be talking more about them. But in this case, I want you to actually think about, right, what you would want to create for this class. Because it doesn't have to be this first assignment, this first code. Yeah, but it might be, right? But I want you to actually think about and do some writing about this exam, what you're going to actually create for this class, right? So I've talked about that. This is where you're going to do the writing in this case and do your replies. Okay, so for the first one, all you have to do here is provide us a link to your GitHub, right? So all you have to do is go to your GitHub account. And again, oh, by the way, I didn't say this, so let me say this here. What you want to do here is in your public repo, create a directory called learn-together. By the way, all your file names should be lowercase. And then inside of there, create a week 2 directory. And then inside of there, put the name of your file. Funny, I realized afterwards, daily burn was actually probably not correct. It was what I started with, so I probably need to change the file name here. But coming back to the GitHub, you'll need to go to our repo and then just get a link to your file. In this case, I'm just going to go to my public, go navigate into that location. So for me, it's learn together. And then, oh, actually, I realized I did that wrong now. That actually is not being, I remember when I did that, it was a little funky. So I'll redo that. But the point is that, right, you can actually click on the file and then that would be your link. You'd come in here and then in the reply, the first thing, right, you can do is just link to my code, right? So you can do it that way, or you can just do my code, right? You can do it that way. It might be a little more fun to do like a heading and then link that there, paste it, insert the link. By the way, it's important when you're linking like that to make sure, and you can do this through the HTML, is that there's a target underscore blank. And I believe actually Canvas will do that automatically when you submit, but I can play around with that and look at it in a minute. So let me go back to here. All right, so that's the first thing. The next thing is the writing part, right? Again, what you're creating in code here does not have to be this. It's really just, and if it is, it's okay. But it's you thinking about giving some time to what you may create for this class. I love it how I have to flip. So, and here's the last thing I'll say about this is that you can also look at apps that you already use in your life and think about how you might be able to recreate that. Or maybe there's parts of that app you want to change already because you feel like, I love this, but, right? Or just using that concept, right? So if you can't, or if you're struggling to come up with a concept, that is a good way to do it. Like I base mine off of my MyFitnessPal. MyFitnessPal is an app I've been using to track my food. Sometimes to track my workouts because I use Google Fit to track my workouts. So in a sense, I'm actually thinking this would be a great app idea if I could combine these in a way that makes sense. I won't go into that because you'd want to know more about my thinking about diet and exercise, and you probably don't want to hear that, although you might. If you want to, come chat with me. Okay, enough. This is your week to learn together. Hope you enjoy. Bye.